Hi, I'm Craig Comstock, and this is Like Wow, a show that focuses on people doing admirable things and who aren't ordinarily seen on TV. Our first guest today is Grant Williams, who founded a program called The Edge here in the Rogue Valley. The Edge takes volunteer mentors into middle schools and high schools to help students develop greater emotional awareness. Welcome, Grant.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So, developing greater emotional awareness, how do you do?
By giving the kids a chance to tell the truth in the safety of numbers. So, a brief history is my inspiration, which is an organization called Challenge Day. We have no official connection with them, but I'm greatly indebted to them for the work they've done for over 25 years. And I decided to, because money is so tight, to start our own program, very similar to how Challenge Day is set up. And we've been at it for about 3.5 years now. We're a 501c3, insured, starting to get our feet on the ground, and a reputation is really now beginning, and I'm very happy about it because the schools are starting to call us and line up.
So what is it that you'll do in the school when they call?
Okay, I will explain that. First of all, let me tell you that I don't think it's a surprise for anybody to know that even in an elementary school, middle school, high school kids, they're all in trouble. Not all of them, but way too many. And this covers ground around gangs, homelessness, hunger, abuse, the bullying problem, which I think we all know is endemic in this country. We address all these problems, including cutting and suicide. And the suicide numbers are just bizarre. I cannot believe how many kids attempt to check out in this country, something like 3 a minute between 13 and 17.
Wow. So you mentioned cutting. What is that?
Cutting is when they take a knife or a razor blade, and they usually work on the arms, and they'll take small slices and then cover them up. And it's a way of dealing with the emotional pain and trauma of their lives. And my position is, how can these kids concentrate and study with the fear of coming to school waiting for a predator to come back at them, or maybe having woken up in a house where there's no food on the table and not even a parent?
So by a predator, you mean a bully?
Yes, I do. When I say predator, I mean bully. So they're in a lot of trouble. And coming to school with these problems and the weight of them totally inflating a little bit more each day without a chance to decompress is dangerous. So the Edge goes into a school, and we're set up in 3 different parts, and we give the kids an opportunity, as I said earlier, in the safety of numbers, to tell the truth. That's the challenge. And we ask them, when I say the safety of numbers, we ask them to cross the line. This is the essence of the morning. It's about a 3-hour, 3.5-hour long workshop. And after they have completed the first part of the workshop, they do the crossing the line part. And that's where they start to see how they're separated by race, ethnicity, age, and how these separations can keep them at a distance from each other. Instead of celebrating diversity, they kind of are scared of each other. But once they start to see how much they have in common with their different fears, they start to connect and realize that they are not the only one.
Right. So you have a physical line across the room.
We draw, lay down a piece of tape, and a little boy sees a teacher crossing the line who has possibly answered a question about, are you afraid to come to school because of the color of your skin or your sexual orientation cross the line? Now, if a 15-year-old sees his teacher do that, to me, that's an instant connection, because that vulnerability creates trust. Yeah. And then the consequence of that is, in addition to trust, relaxation and a willingness to be more open and study more.
In this room, how many students typically?
We like to do 100.
Wow.
Anything more than that is a little too much. At Lincoln Savage, we had almost 200 kids, and we learned a lesson the hard way that day. And there have been many lessons learned, but 100 is a good number, or lower.
And how many teachers typically, if there be 100 students?
Half a dozen.
That many?
Yeah, at least. And now I'm talking about men and women. So when we separate the genders, the men who help us are given a list of questions to ask the boys, which are mostly kind of lightweight and fun. A couple of them are serious, like, is there a problem in your school with drugs, and if so, how do you feel about that? That would be one of the more serious ones. And then the women, of course, ask the girls questions, and those questions are a little different. Most of them are the same and articulated the same, but some of the questions, for example, one of them and this came from the retired principal of Crater Academy up in Central Point, she's very concerned about how a lot of young ladies are dressing. So the question is, have you ever worn something that made you feel uncomfortable, but wore it anyway because you needed to feel like you belonged? So this is a very key question, and it can make the girls open up right away. And every time we've done an EDGE, and we're like in the mid-30s now since we started, the girls drop down a lot faster, because when we're done, the boys, we go back to the gymnasium, and until we get their permission, we don't come in. But I've always noticed that a lot of the high school girls and middle school girls are very emotional during this process. The boys, by and large, no.
Now, you say they drop down. What do you mean?
That means being emotionally literate, emotionally intelligent, if you will, to where they're telling the truth that tells the people with them something that nobody else knows, that they've decided to go below the waterline and show somebody who they are beyond what is seen on the surface every day in a classroom or a bus stop or a high school corridor.
I should think that this vulnerability is especially, it's hard to know who it's harder for the teachers or the students.
Yeah, it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging. And when we do crossing the line, I have seen many times, and the younger, the more predictable, I've seen the boys drop down and start crying. Because they might be admitting something about themselves, possibly for the first time in their life, about a problem at home, or they're scared to come to school because of a predator. We also ask the question, how many of you kids on this side of the line and adults have ever been a bully? And 75% at least every time. So they start to focus in on the reality of just calling somebody a name can be very, very painful. We've all grown up to believe the age-old adage, sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. That's just not true. I still carry scars from 2 kids that made fun of me during 7th and 8th grade. I still think about it to this day. So when these kids start to see their classmates answer these questions honestly, maybe they would not have crossed the line, but now they feel safe. Now, some of the questions, I'll use the word heavy, are very heavy. And they have to be articulated in a way to make the teenager or pre-adolescent feel safe. So I would say, if I'm facilitating, How many of you on this side of the line, or do you know somebody close to you who has ever attempted suicide? That would be very dangerous, I think, for a 14-year-old to admit that, yeah, I've done this. I mean, maybe nobody else in the world knows that. So he's expressing his concern about a friend, or he's expressing the truth about himself, but nobody knows. But he feels decompressed. He feels the freedom to do that and face the world authentically and responsibly and say, this is who I am, or I'm standing here now for my friend. Mm-hmm. The suicide question is the last question. Mm-hmm. And I think it's imperative that I mention, at this time, a lot of these kids are drained. And they have been very agreeable with the request to be silent, because it's crucially important to be silent. Somebody might be having a meltdown, and if somebody behind her is giggling, you know, it ruins the moment. So I turn it over to, or the questions are turned over to another facilitator who does what we call the gold line crossings. And this is flipping the coin, and now we recognize them for their character, their sacrifices, the demands put on them that they didn't want, the fact that a lot of what they're facing on a daily basis is what they've inherited and not what they created. Mm-hmm. So how many of you kids on this side of the line, I shouldn't say kids, have ever interfered in a situation where someone was being bullied and maybe nothing was accomplished, but you decided, you made a choice not to be a bystander, maybe at risk to your health? Uh-huh. How many of you have done that? And then they cross the line. And then how many of you have taken on a job in the afternoon to help the family pay the bills because your father and mother have both jobs and it's hurting? You're living in a world of hurt because the bills are piling up. How many of you have tutored somebody, a friend, or how many of you have asked a friend or not who was homeless to come stay with you? So this gives us a chance to see them and build them back up again. And now we see their gold and who they are on another level. And it's still the truth.
You're using gold in the Mankind Project sense of...
I got that word from the MKP project. I've been a warrior for about 13 years now, and I've also worked with Boys to Men for about 7 years. I brought that to South Africa, I think, 5 years ago. And a lot of this experience and training has given me preparation for the work we do in the Edge.
Very good.
And I'm very happy about how we're progressing now. I mean, look, I'm on TV with you. So
well, thank you for coming in today and
Very welcome.
introducing very quickly this program.